This week on the show, we review Meltdown and Spectre responses from various other BSD projects, show you how to run CentOS in bhyve, look at GhostBSD 11.1, we have our first interview for this year, and we look at the case against the fork syscall. So there's something in it for everyone. Check out this episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 229, The Meltdown of Spectre, recorded on the 17th of January 2018. Hello, I'm Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we have as yet another great episode prepared for you. And as we promised in the last episode, we're going to cover the Spectre Meltdown disaster for the other BSDs, the other than FreeBSD, in this week's episode. So our headlines is, of course, Meltdown, but for the other BSDs, Dragonfly, NetBSD, OpenBSD. Yeah. So let's get into it, Oz.
Well, much has happened in the last week. But before we actually get into a status update from the mitigations for the various other BSDs, we have some other more important industry-wide updates. First, Intel, which earlier this week, this week when we're recording, last week when you watch this, released some microcode updates that were required for the mitigations of the variant 2 of Spectre. Intel has since had to recall those microcode updates because of issues they cause. They say here, we have received reports from a few customers of higher system reboots after applying the firmware updates. Specifically, these systems are running Intel Broadwell and Haswell CPUs for both client and data centers. Higher than normal reboots. So apparently some level of the computer just rebooting is normal for the hardware.
Okay.
But after the firmware update, that number goes up. Because that's what I want for my server. It randomly rebooting because of the hardware. Can't even blame the operating system.
It needs to readjust itself and find where it should work now and how it's going to progress from there.
So I know that Illumos and FreeBSD have reverted the Intel microcode update to not push that on people, and are waiting for newer microcode updates from Intel. So there's that. So, Intel attempting to meet its promise to have this issue mitigated on about the last 5 years of processors by the end of the week of the 12th, and having to pull the microcode update back because it was causing random computers to reboot. Next, updates from AMD. AMD has confirmed that its processors are vulnerable to both variants of Spectre. Originally, it was not thought that some of the Spectre stuff applied to AMD, but it turns out it does. So that will require a microcode update in addition to the OS update to actually mitigate that. And those firmware updates are forthcoming. And we'll have a little bit more about that in a minute here. But specifically, AMD says that variant 1, the bounds check bypass, we believe that this threat can be contained with operating system level patches and working with operating systems to do that. Although Microsoft released a patch and it was causing some AMD processors, older models, to have issues. So Microsoft has had to pause distribution of that patch. And then for variant 2, they say, we believe that AMD's processor architecture makes it difficult to exploit variant 2, but we continue to work closely with the industry on this threat. We have defined additional steps through a combination of processor microcode updates and OS patches that will be made available to AMD customers to help mitigate this threat. Specifically, AMD will make optional microcode updates available to our customers and partners for both Ryzen and EPYC starting this week. We expect to make updates available for previous generation processors over the coming weeks.
Yeah, just hold on a little bit longer until everyone has the right patches ready.
Yeah, because now it's Intel's had to claw back microcode. Microsoft has had to claw back patches. It's getting a bit hairy.
It's pretty much coding under pressure, and a lot of more errors are being done because you don't have the time to really focus on the problem and just being rushed by getting the patches out. So, yeah.
And these are the patches from people that have had 6 months to prepare.
That's also true, yeah. So they should have something already in the in the drawer.
Yeah. Fujitsu has a PDF here detailing some of their systems and how they're affected. They expect that operating system updates will be needed for pretty much everything, including their Spark line of processors. And they may or may not have new firmware versions for some of these. Some of them, they do have a firmware version, although it's not been released yet. There are a couple models where the firmware is available today, but most of the release is not yet confirmed. But it seems that even Spark might be hit by this.
Yeah, our worst fears have come true. Pretty much everyone is needing to scramble to get some fixes out.
So the Register, as usual, has some nice commentary on this. Saying that Intel slipped out a statement saying we received reports of computers randomly rebooting. Intel has said if it needs to create a fix, it will. I'm guessing that the answer to that will be yes, because people's computers rebooting doesn't seem like an acceptable solution. And the Register says here, if new code is needed, Intel will need to get it right. The company already faces numerous class action lawsuits. Data center operators already scrambling to conduct unplanned maintenance will not be happy about a fix that reduces stability.
Yeah, this is less than optimal for them.
Of course, they say Intel can take some measure of comfort from the fact that they are no longer alone, as AMD has confirmed that its processors are vulnerable to both versions of Spectre. It says AMD has said that operating system patches alone will address the Spectre bounds check bypass bug, but fixing the branch target injection flaw will require both microcode fixes and software fixes. The Register has also asked other server vendors how they're addressing the bugs. Oracle has patched its version of Linux, however said that they have no comment or statement on this for now, which is interesting when they were asked about their x86 systems they sell, their x86 cloud, their version of Linux, and their version of Solaris.
Yeah, I see a certain person hauling certain words at them right now, but or already has. But yeah, it's certainly not a nice thing denying this or keeping your customers in the dark when everyone knows by now that this is out there.
And then Fujitsu, who makes some Spark chips, has said that they've published their advisory for both their servers, PCs, and their Spark systems, and some of the Spark stuff is still under investigation. So that's just a recap of what's changed since we started writing the show notes for this episode.
Yeah, so we won't run out of news anytime soon, but hopefully these are getting from bad news into better news. But yeah, for now, it's just what it is.
So the first official response from OpenBSD here says, so yes, we, the OpenBSD developers, are not totally asleep, and a handful of us are working out how to deal with Intel's screw-up, aka the Meltdown attack. While we have the advantage of less complexity in this area, we don't run 32-bit on 64-bit compatibility, there's still a pile of details to work through about what has to be always in the page table versus what can, should, and must be hidden. And they also note that they received no non-public information in the original disclosures. And then there's also a series of mailing list threads.
A lot of them by now, yeah. But yeah, certainly everyone has their take on that, and there's certainly discussions spinning around the best solutions, how to get out of this mess, and preparing solutions and building proper patches and fixes.
Yes. So specifically, the mention of OpenBSD getting no non-public information. They said that they've seen posts elsewhere and so on, but specifically, Theodore Rat says, if only the millionaires and billionaires benefit from receiving information to make improvements to the so-called open and free software stack, then the ecosystem has truly grown to become captured and will soon gain all of the market benefits of other supply chains, such as ensuring you have inexpensive salmonella spinach on your table purchased from the small section of vendors, but not safety, security, diversity, and choice. He says some people should be ashamed of themselves, but they probably just bought stock options.
Yeah, the whole stock options thing around when it got out that it happened is also kind of interesting by itself.
Right, I think in this case he was talking about put options, where he's just making money off the stock going down.
Yeah, that's the other way around. Sure. It certainly was bad information-wise, but I guess if you're a big company, you certainly focus on your paying customers more instead of the smaller ones. But it certainly is not the best way to handle the situation, and
so IT Wire has some coverage here where they actually interviewed Theo, and specifically Theo's pull quote here. Only Tier 1 companies received advanced information. That is not responsible disclosure. That is selective disclosure. Everyone below Tier 1 has just gotten screwed, which was pretty much the case. Originally, remember, the embargo date was supposed to be January 9th, although it turns out that might have been just so that the Intel CEO could do the keynote at the CES conference without being asked questions about this. But it actually came out January 3rd. Google justified breaking the embargo, saying, we are posting before an originally coordinated disclosure date of January 9th because of existing public reports and growing speculation in the press and security research community about the issue, which raises the risk of it being exploited.
Yep.
The reason why such bugs have come about was put down by Derat to Intel's desire to stay far ahead in the competition, hence it playing fast and loose with the security settings on the processor. There are papers about the risky side effects of speculative loads, people knew, and as a result, no other vendors' chips have such speculative loads in a significant way. And he said Intel engineers attend the same conferences as other company engineers and read the same papers about performance-enhancing strategies. So it's hard to believe they ignored the risky aspects. I bet they were instructed to ignore the risk.
Yeah, and if people are thinking, I've heard talk from Theo about Intel before, well, this is certainly not the first time. So in 2007, Theo talked about how Intel x86 had major design problems in their chips. And we pulled out the mailing list post from 2007. This is the 27th of June. And similar things. It's not the same issue here, but similar problems and how they deal with it are discussed in that one.
This isn't even the email I thought it was. It's a different one.
Yeah, it's he has certain points about it, and having the reference to a couple of years ago, it's you can see whether things got worse or better, and in this case, there's not much progress in the right direction, I guess.
Yep.
I mean, CPUs are a complicated thing. Don't get me wrong, and I mean, Intel has a lot of expertise, but yeah, it's certainly not a desired thing to have this out in the wild, and pretty much every CPU generation we have from the last like 5 years or so is affected. So that's a serious thing that is going to plague them for a while, I guess. Even though when patches are out and
the design cycle to make a new CPU that doesn't have this problem is, even with their 6 months head start, it's still going to be a while.
Yeah, if they really re-engineer the whole thing, it's still not coming to be available tomorrow or next week.
Another patch that's gone into OpenBSD is the introduction of a microcode updater. So this tool makes it possible to update the Intel microcode once the root file system has been mounted. This depends on the Intel-firmware package that contains newer Intel microcode and is installed with the firmware update tool that's already part of OpenBSD. The update should happen much earlier, since the updating of the microcode can add or remove not only feature flags, but also whole features. For now, only update feature flags that are relevant to Spectre.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
it seems like microcode updating is becoming the new system upgrading.
Yeah. The microcode updating tool on FreeBSD has also got changes recently, and those have been ported to Dragonfly. And very similar, of course, the updated microcode that was in the port in FreeBSD had to be reverted because it turns out Intel has recalled it because it might cause your computer to randomly reboot.
Yeah, which is certainly not getting your system much more stable or preparing it for new patches. So reverting was the wise choice in this case.
Yes. So then from Dragonfly, we have the earliest post, which is January 5th, where Matthew Dillon says, Meltdown is an Intel-specific bug. AMD is immune. Some ARM CPUs might also be vulnerable, but Dragonfly doesn't run on ARM, so not a problem for them. He says what Meltdown is basically a full kernel memory disclosure bug. An unprivileged user program may essentially discern the contents of all of the kernel's memory on an Intel CPU. This bug works because Intel CPUs can do speculative reads across the protection domains. And it goes on to explain the different bits and introduce the syscalls they've added to allow you to disable the mitigations, which will make it easier to benchmark before and after, but also allow you to test it and to see how it applies to your workload.
Apparently they did some performance work with the patch, and so they write that nominal program. Yeah.
So there's a number of patches. The first one is the Intel user kernel separation MMU bug, which is 3 separate commits. There's a lot of detail here, but I won't just sit here and read the whole commit to you because it's quite a bit.
Yeah, it's big.
But there's those 3 commits, and they have some explanation of how they work and what they do, and so on. And then there's another commit from after that. Oh, no, that's part 4. That's not the commit I thought it was. And then the syscalls have been renamed in Dragonfly. It's MAChdep, which stands for machine dependent, so it depends on your hardware. They have Meltdown mitigation and Spectre mitigation, so you can turn them on and off that way, instead of naming them for the name of the feature that does the mitigation, which makes it harder for you to tell which one's which. So the new names, I think, make more sense.
Mm-hmm.
But more recently, they've committed full IBRS and IBPB support. So IBRS, or Indirect Branch Restricted Speculation, is an x86 feature that requires the microcode update for both Intel and AMD. And it's designed to mitigate variant 2 of the vulnerability, which I think is when a program can cause another program to speculate a certain way. So once you have the microcode update and the OS update that uses it, if the IBRS bit is set, near return and near indirect jumps or calls will not allow the predicted target address to be controlled by code that executed in a less privileged prediction mode before the IBRS bit is set or was last written, as long as all RSB entries from the previous less privileged restricted mode have been overwritten. So it makes sure that another program can't influence what's going to happen in your program. So stop userland from causing the kernel to do things. There's also a note here that the speculation on Skylake and later requires these patches, and doing it this way, or dynamic IBRS, you have to use that instead of the Google's workaround, the retpoline, the return trampoline. That doesn't solve the problem on Skylake, the newest of the processors, the new scalable series of Xeon processors and so on. And then the second feature, or indirect branch prediction barrier, setting the IBPB ensures that earlier code's behavior does not control later indirect branch predictions. It is used when context switching to a new untrusted address space, so when switching between the user and the kernel. Unlike IBRS, IBPB is a command MSR and does not retain its state. So both of those are available now, and there's also a Dragonfly BSD handbook page on running a secure browsing platform on Dragonfly. That might be worth a read. It includes a general loss of performance matrix below, so people can get an idea of the cost. They've included MMU isolation overhead and a bunch of other things. So you can see on Haswell, enabling the IBRS has a performance impact between 16 and 64%. For Skylake, it's between 19 and 34%. And on Kaby Lake, it's between 19 and 31%.
That's significant already. Yeah, I don't want my PC to be, or my machine to be that slow.
Yeah. Whereas the performance difference with both these features off is between 2 and 4%.
Okay, that's, I think, okay.
But if you have the features off, then you're not protected, so that's not very helpful.
Yeah.
But, these are just the very first versions. There might be improvements that can be made, and we'll have to see. Phoronix has run some benchmarks, although I don't know if those are only the MMU patches and not the IBRS. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it doesn't say.
Yeah. Well, it's Phoronix. What do you expect? Anyway, moving on to NetBSD. They've committed two things. The first is called Hot Patch. It allows them to use a new read-only Hot Patch section in the kernel. It scans the section and patch what needs to be patched. It is now possible to hot patch the contents of a macro as well. This is used with SMAP, which is the something memory application prevention or something, access prevention. It's a processor feature. And so it's been switched to use the system and saves the call and return for each kernel entry and exit points. And it's something similar that other operating systems are doing. And then the second patch introduces SVS, or the separate virtual space, which is the separate page tables. It unmaps kernel pages when running in userland, and they only unmap the PTE area currently.
Okay.
And there's a bunch of other patches going on OpenBSD as well. So we'll have to see where things go from there.
Yeah, and we'll keep you updated with where the individual BSDs are moving along with patches and mitigations. And hopefully we'll all have our old systems back from a secure standpoint, and also having resolved the actual Spectre and Meltdown problems without being too slow.
right now there's so much conflicting information and so much, oh, we have a patch, oh, it doesn't work, oh, it might make your machine reboot, and so on, that it's very hard to decide what to do, or, you've installed the patches that they have, but they're going to have another one, and then it's like, am I actually patched? Is this good enough? And when, how, it
gets causing a lot of confusion and...
yes, and especially, you have machines in production, you can't take them down every day to install the next day, another day's worth of patches. But at the same time, you can't have the production machines be vulnerable to known vulnerabilities either, right? And it's going to take a little while to get this all sorted out.
Yep.
I can imagine the craziness if no one had gotten some notice about this.
Yeah, where everyone was in the dark and could not prepare for anything, and someone on the internet posted some exploits and something everyone had to know.
Lots of time to prepare, and they still can't seem to get it together. So yeah, it's very complicated. And it's what Theo said in one of the emailing threads is like, now we have a bunch of operating systems changing how things have worked for the last 20 years, and there's going to inevitably be bugs, and they could be nasty security bugs.
Yeah, there could be, follow-up bugs or stuff that worked is now broken again without noticing. And there certainly needs to be more testing being done and, continuously checking the quality.
But at the same time, everybody's in a rush to get these patches out. And those two things are opposite sides of the scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
More testing takes more time, and more time means patches not as fast.
Yep.
Well, this week's episode of Happiness and Joy is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Head over to DigitalOcean.com and sign up and spin up a FreeBSD instance in under 55 seconds.
Yeah.
An array of sizes to pick from, even more coming later this year. And they have tons of other features, including monitoring, cloud firewalls, block storage, object storage, load balancers, floating IPs, so you can have a single IP you can move between different VMs. So you can have, your dev and your staging and your production environments. And then when you want to test the version before you deploy it to production, you just move the website's IP from production to staging. And if it works, okay, we publish that to production and go. And if it doesn't, we just point back to the old production and everything's fine. It makes it much easier to do things.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, there's also small things like you don't need a separate software to access the console because they have an integrated console client in their website.
HTML5, it doesn't require any extra nonsense.
Yeah, so these are nice little things that DigitalOcean provides. You can also team up with a couple of friends and manage a droplet yourself together with them and make sure that they don't see, if you're responsible for the billing, that you can see that they don't see your billing information, but they can manage the machine just like you.
Yep. 4.9's SLA. They have a great API. So while their website is great and you can do everything from it, being able to use command line or API-driven tools, so much better. We often create large batches of DigitalOcean droplets in their web interface because it works very nicely. But when you want to delete them, it's a little tedious because they want to make sure you actually want to delete it. But just using the command line tool, I can just zap 20 instances in 1 second. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, the more virtual machines and droplets starting, the easier it gets to kind of get confused, but they make it easy to keep an eye on, get individual performance measurements from those, and also figure out how much your machines are currently costing you. And definitely start with using our coupon code, DigitalOcean. You enter that into your little field where you create your first virtual machine. The code is FreeBSD Now. And then you can get started and explore the DigitalOcean ecosystem and what they have in store for you.
Yeah, you get a $10 credit, which is the $5 instance for 2 months or the $10 instance for 1 month, or you can have the $960 instance for a couple of hours, or whatever you want to do, or whatever combination of those you want.
Yeah, there's pretty much the flexibility there to do any kind of quick computing, or if you want to do some more memory-heavy work, then start up a droplet of those, and then once you're done, you stop it, you delete it, and you're not getting billed anymore for that.
You know, borrow a high CPU instance, run your Poudriere build, compile all the packages you want, ship them off, delete the machine. Oh, I got billed for 6 hours. That hurt my wallet so much.
Yep. So these are the use cases that the cloud is good for.
Yep. So our other news story this week is about running a tutorial from Daemon Security about running CentOS in bhyve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this was made possible with the addition of UEFI and FreeBSD since version 11. And so users of bhyve can now use the UEFI bootloader instead of the grub2 bhyve port for booting these operating systems, like Microsoft Windows as the more demanded one, Linux also, and OpenBSD. And so this one is using or installing CentOS with bhyve. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that you would do is install the required software on your FreeBSD system using package, of course. So you install the UEFI-EDK2 bhyve port, and with that graphical support, you can then use a VNC client like Tiger VNC. There are a lot of others in the ports collection. You can pick any one you like, but they choose Tiger VNC, and you just do the same with that one, package install. And now you pretty much have all the bits and pieces together to start your volume, because that's the virtual disk on ZFS in this case that will house your operating system's files. So this where they created 20 gigabyte volume, and they choose wisely the vol mode equals dev, because that pretty much acts like a raw device, so that the
right. It makes sure that geom on the host doesn't lock the device and make it so that the VM can't write to it.
Yeah, and then you pretty much create a name for it so that you remember, this is the disk for that operating system. Because if you start getting really into bhyves and you have 20 disks or more about, and you need to, which disk was assigned to which virtual machine? So they choose CentOS 0 here, and then they made some changes to the bootloader. They added the vol mode equals 2, so that sets the vol mode equals dev automatically once you reboot, so that you don't have to set it each time. They should have done that before they did the ZFS create, by the way.
Well, this one's so that for each time you reboot, it's fine.
Yeah.
Because they set it for that specific device when they created it anyway.
Yeah, and then you load the
VMM kernel module, which is the kernel side of bhyve, create a tap interface, set the sysctl so that tap interfaces automatically become up, administratively up when they're opened by a program. And then create a bridge, add your regular network interface and the tap interface to it, bring the bridge up, and now when the bhyve starts, it'll be bridged with your physical network adapter.
Mm-hmm. This is pretty straightforward, actually. Mm-hmm. And now it starts getting into how you would start your bhyve, because it takes a couple of parameters, and you want to make that easy to change and configure, because you don't want to type that on the command line the whole time, so you write a small shell script here.
With the EFI stuff, it's also nice because it's not two separate commands anymore. It's not bhyve load or grub bhyve and then bhyve. They can all be done in one command. So you just tell it how many CPUs, how much RAM, set up the network card, the CD with the OS on it, the block device that's going to be your hard drive. Tell it that, hey, I want a frame buffer so that I can have graphics, and give it the host and port and height and width of the screen. Tell it that for my mouse, I'd like to use a tablet because that's exact pointing instead of relative, so it'll work much better in VNC. And then you set up the serial port and tell it to boot from the bhyve UEFI firmware image and give the VM a name, and it will boot.
Mm-hmm. Then once you shut down the bhyve, you need to issue a separate command called bhyvectl --destroy. It sounds dangerous, but it's just cleaning up the remnants of the machine. You don't actually delete the machine on the disk, so it's still there after you run this one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Get it up
After
and
that,
running, and it just works.
yeah. Then you basically install the thing that you're, in this case, CentOS, and then you can connect to the machine once it's rebooted using your VNC client and use it as any virtual machine that you have in the cloud or somewhere else. Yeah, so this is a nice, straightforward...
Yes, thank you to our friend Michael Shirk for writing this up.
So we have our first interview for this year with an Unix architect. He's been on the Jupiter Broadcasting channel. He's an avid listener to our episodes, and now we're interviewing him. First of all, welcome to the show, and thanks for agreeing to this interview. So what we talk to everyone and want to know from those people is tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get started with Unix and BSD in particular?
That's a bit of a winding journey, but I started getting really tired with Windows in school while I was like in middle school in our computer classes, and started looking up for free alternatives. Found out about the open source movement and this weird OS called Ubuntu. Failed several times trying to get it running on any of my hardware. Eventually looped back around to it, ran through a few different distros, including Gentoo as my daily driver, got introduced to the wonderful different things that ZFS can do, thanks to Alan on both Tarsnap and BSD Now. Got really interested in running that on my Gentoo install. Turns out ZFS on Linux is really not all that great an idea to run as your rootfs. Got tired of things breaking and switched over to a regular mix of FreeBSD, hardened BSD, TrueOS, Dragonfly, and OpenBSD, just kind of depending on what system, what sort of utility I need.
Cool. So what particular features of Dragonfly BSD attracted you to it?
Really, it's just how the entire OS has been kind of engineered around the idea of reducing locks and high performance, high availability sort of configurations. I mean, even the file systems, the network stack, all of that has, in pretty much every benchmark that I've seen, even beat out some Linux distros for just pure performance. So it's been really interesting to dig into things like Hammer, where your file system can actually act as a version control system for your data. With the undo command pulling back all known versions of a given file if you accidentally delete it. And the dev community on the IRC channel has been pretty great too. So it's been a really fun experience getting into the documentation, all the things that make BSD different from Linux, and having a nice workstation OS.
Mm-hmm. Which brings us to our next question. Are you using it primarily as a desktop or as a server OS, or are any other BSDs in use?
Well, Dragonfly is primarily my desktop system. Seems to work best with the latest video cards and GPU drivers. Outside of that, I've got hardened BSD running on my VPS instance, and at work I've got a FreeBSD instance set up for network monitoring, but that's primarily because hardened BSD or Dragonfly wouldn't have LibreSSL in base instead of OpenSSL, and the monitoring application doesn't compile against LibreSSL. And then we've got OpenBSD boxes getting set up for firewall management.
Okay, that's a good mix.
Yeah.
Yep. So you could tell us a little bit more about Hammer 2 and what specific features of it you're using?
With Hammer 2, the main things that I'm using right now are the snapshots and the pseudo file systems similar to the CFS datasets, and transparent compression. Yeah. So that's pretty much it right now. The clustering code hasn't been completed yet, so once that's introduced, it'll be fun to have set up a clustered network with storage using Hammer 2, and once it's more stable, look into maybe getting BE-ADM to support Hammer 2 snapshots instead of just CFS, or create a similar tool using the Hammer 2 snapshots. So we can have like boot environments on Hammer 2.
Yeah, and the undo feature in Hammer is really attractive.
Yeah, so if you have 3 snapshots, A, B, and C, and you want to roll back to A, do you need to delete B and C, or can you preserve those in Hammer?
To my knowledge, there's no reason that you'd have to delete the intermediate snapshots. I can't say that I've tried or really looked into it all that much, but things like the undo feature will just pull back either a given transaction ID for the snapshot, or pull back all known variants so that you can pick which one you need.
Right. Well, even with ZFS, you don't have to delete the snapshots. You could just clone the old one, and then you get the old version back. But you can't
mostly what people are
forward and backward in time, because that just gets complicated.
The time machine for your file system. Yeah. So
are you patented already?
Yeah. So are you contributing to any of the BSD projects, or to Dragonfly in particular?
Not yet, though. That's mostly because I don't feel like I can actually make anything worth contributing at this point.
That's what we all thought when we started.
Yeah. I'll just do a little bit of user work, and then suddenly you're vice president of FreeBSD Foundation.
I mean, I am working on a few things personally, and if they work out well, then I'll submit patches like getting SSH lockout into hardened BSD, or tweaking the Dragonfly installer to create pseudo file systems similar to how the FreeBSD installer sets up CFS datasets. That way you have separate snapshots for like user local and the home directories and so on.
Yeah, touching the installer is a great way to end up being a developer.
Alan would know, yeah.
It's not. I wasn't the first person to follow that path either.
Yeah, but people can pick any kind of work they like in the operating system. That's why there's so much areas where people can come in and then they end up somewhere else.
Yeah, just because you got started in one place doesn't mean you have to stay there.
Yeah, it's not set in stone forever.
Do you have any specific tips or things you would tell to a beginner who is looking at trying Dragonfly BSD for the first time?
I mean, mostly the same thing that you'd tell anyone trying a different OS for the first time. Don't expect it to act like whichever platform you're coming from, because I mean, even though administering it is similar to FreeBSD, things definitely are different. And I mean, if you're coming from something else like Linux, then BSD just doesn't behave like Linux at all once you start getting past, installing Bash or whatever other interactive shell you like the most, and become familiar with the man pages, because that's where the richest documentation is. There are people who try their best to keep the online wiki updated, but the online documentation updated, but they obviously can't test everything, and they're mostly coming from their own experiences and what they've been able to gather off of the mailing lists or IRC conversations. So, you make sure that you have the documentation handy, and if you have a internet connection, hop on IRC. That way you can get some feedback about how you might need to rethink how you're approaching certain problems.
Yeah, I know that this is what I've been trying to encourage more user-type people to come to conferences, specifically because just having conversations with developers about the way you're using the tool that they created can vastly change how they build it. Because, recently there was a bug report against the ZFS replication script that I didn't write but that I maintain now, and they found that in the specific case where you're trying to replicate a data set from one pool to another pool, but they're on the same machine, the script actually makes an assumption that's not true. Whereas if you're doing one data set to another place in the same pool, it works. And if you're replicating to another machine, it works. But if it's a second pool on the same machine, it doesn't work. And it's just a use case I never had, so I never tested, and I'm guessing the same is true of the original author. And a number of other people have contributed to it. It's just nobody's ever actually tried to have two pools on the same machine and replicate between them.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's important to have users come to the conferences and talk to developers about their use cases and their problems and so on.
Yeah, definitely. It's good to get the feedback. If it's just people telling you, hey, this tool is great, it saved me hours of work or made my life easier.
Oh, yeah. I can't count the number of times that I've been trying to help people out, and my answer is that should be possible, but I've never had a reason to verify that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The chat room also asks questions, so we interject this one here. They ask, do you have any interesting stories from work related to BSD, relieving experiences or saving the day?
Mostly with the network monitoring, because then I don't have to use systemd, and the IP Route 2 tools that come with CentOS or any modern enterprise Linux now. With the BSDs, everything's just so much easier, and we can take advantage of things like having transparent compression so that our logs don't blow up the server's rootfs, and have bulletproof upgrades, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, the bulletproof upgrade makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
And now the ZFS has the compressed arc where you keep stuff compressed in the cache. It's made a very big difference for some database servers. I have a machine that only has 128 gigs of RAM, but ZFS is using about 60 gigs of that and caching 100 gigs of database. So basically the entire database is in RAM. And obviously the performance you get from that is a lot better than the performance you get from even SSDs or NVMe.
Yeah. And it's also the small things like, oh, this switch isn't there, or it has a different meaning, or I just know from finger memory how to pull up this information and don't have to look at the manual or online how to get that. It's, a whole different experience. So we met you at VBSDCon last year, and we want to ask you to give our listeners a little bit how your experience was. Was this your first BSD conference?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote in with a very basic outline. My very first time going to really any tech conference. Although I made a pretty, in hindsight, kind of stupid decision to drive all the way from Central Texas to Virginia. So that was about 3,000 miles one way. But
it shows dedication.
But it was a pretty great experience. I mean, meeting you guys, Michael Dexter, Dan from Tarsnap. Unfortunately, missing Sean Webb by about a day. But the talks were great. All the other people there were great. I unfortunately don't really remember most of their names.
Yeah.
But
new names and faces. It's kind of overwhelming.
Hundreds of them at once. It's just, yeah.
And of course the dramatic reading between Benno and George Neville of Savaged by System D was a really great way to just kind of cap off the conference.
Yeah.
My only real regret is being a little bit too shy to really interact more, being a bit too tired from driving all that way to actually take the BSD certification exam. But hopefully I'll be able to do that at a BSD CAN this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. I made most of the same mistakes at my first BSD CAN. I came for the conference days. I didn't arrive a day or two early to try to get adjusted to the, being in a different place and sometimes a different time zone and so on. And yeah, just being too shy and not meeting enough people and so on. I came with my business partner, so I had one person I knew and I kind of just stuck with them the whole time, and that was a mistake, really. So it was interesting. The next year, I got invited to the Developer Summit to attend a doc working shop. And so I was there a couple of days early, and I was by myself. And so I went over to the opening night pub, and, I was nervous and didn't know anybody. But there was a group of people sitting at this table talking about enterprise SSDs. And I'm like, I can talk about that. And they joined in and had a great time.
Yeah, it's normal to be nice or to be shy in this environment, because some people have known each other for years and they just meet each other at conference and just continue where they left off on IRC with their conversations, and you immediately are somewhere down in the innards of the kernel and you're just listening to those people. It's like you're stunned for a moment, and then it's kind of intimidating, but we're trying to open it up more to newcomers and bringing them into the conversation so that everyone gets the benefit of knowing the community and talk about the operating system that they all like. We don't want to turn people away, so that's. But it gets better on the second one because you know a couple of people already, and then you can slowly and steadily you get to know more people, and it's still getting interesting, and even more people you meet, the better it gets. Sometimes you know too many people, and then you're at the conference and come back and say, he was there, but I missed him completely, and I had no way of talking to him because there were so many other good conversations.
Yeah, and I've been to 5 BSD cans so far, and a bunch of people look up to me as someone who's been there the whole time. I'm like, actually, well, if I look at all these other people, they've been coming to BSD can for 10 years, and some of them more, and it's. No matter how much you've been there, there's someone that's been there more and someone that's been there less. So you're just in the middle, so it's fine.
Yeah. I mean, if you can make it to BSD can, maybe not driving.
Oh no, not doing that again.
But yeah, you'll certainly have a good time. Even if you just hang out with Alan and me, it's you'll find a lot of people, because we also have this beginner session at the night before the first conference day, and there you can see this guy's new, and you get assigned a buddy if you have any questions during the conference, and then it's usually working out for everyone.
Yeah, it gives you both bits. You meet all the other new people, so that you have other people to share the misery of being the new guy with, but also you get introduced to a bunch of the people you'll recognize throughout the conference, and they'll know who you are, and that means that if you're like, hey, could you introduce me to so and so, just to break the ice to get that started, or can you help me pick a talk? Even can make things a lot easier. So I'm really glad to see that we're starting to do the newbie thing at BSD Can.
Oh, yeah. And for that one, I'm even trying to drag a friend of mine along to get him to dive into this wonderful world of BSD.
Oh, excellent.
Yes, if everybody brought a friend, then that'd be great.
Yeah. We would need a whole lot more conference rooms then. But yeah, that's our ultimate goal, to increase the community and show people what we do and what kind of a nice environment we have.
Yeah. So was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, not in particular. It's been great talking with you guys.
Yes, thank you for taking the time out to talk to us today.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, thank you. And now you can return to the chat room and follow the rest of the BSD Now recording.
Yeah.
All right, then I guess we'll see you at BSD Can in June. It's already far off, but it's coming soon enough.
Yeah, I'm starting to look at making plans for that.
Well, you have until next Friday to submit a proposal to give a talk at BSD Can.
Yep. Then we will make sure you get there by any means.
The conference, make sure that you get there and you have somewhere to stay. And
your experiences with Dragonfly BSD would certainly draw an interesting crowd, that because we don't have that many talks from Dragonfly BSD as far as I remember.
Yeah, they're pretty rare.
Maybe next year.
Okay.
Maybe.
Well, take it slow.
Don't be shy.
There's something more coming each year. Increase it over time.
Get a bit more experience under my belt and a few more things to talk about, that sort of thing.
So, time to get into our news roundup this week. And now that we've scared you all about the Spectre thing, there's something good also Ghost-like, because there's GhostBSD 11.1 around. And this is covered on DistroWatch. So we have a little introduction what GhostBSD is.
It says GhostBSD is a desktop-oriented operating system based on FreeBSD. The project takes the FreeBSD operating system and adds a desktop environment, some popular applications, a graphical package manager, and the Linux compatibility packages. GhostBSD is available in two flavors, with Mate, the successor to GNOME 2, or XFCE. It is currently available in 64-bit for AMD 64 computers. So they downloaded the Mate edition, which is a 2.3 gigabyte ISO.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is the installer then.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's a graphical installer apparently. So they write GhostBSD system installer is a graphical application which begins by asking us for a preferred language, which you can select from a list. And then you select the keyboard layout, a time zone. This is pretty uniform for pretty much any operating system installer. And then pretty much it gets into the disk partitioning part. You can let GhostBSD take over the entire disk using UFS as the file system, or create a custom UFS layout, or use, of course, ZFS. And then it will be creating a pool and data sets accordingly. So the DistroWatch guys decided to give the ZFS option a try. And once they did that, they pretty much didn't have any more options to go through. So the rest was done by the installer. They were given a chance to set up the size for the swap device and choose ZFS as a plain volume with a mirrored disk for backups and RAID management with multiple disks. And then pretty much the installer picked it up. You can also then user and pick shells that you prefer. So there's Bash, C shell, TCH, Corn shell, and Z shell available.
But then, apparently, of course, the default is fish, which they found unusual, and so do I.
Yeah, it's not the one you would pick as a first, but yeah, that's their choice. And then pretty much the installer does the copying of the files and then offers to reboot the machine.
Yep. Once it boots up, early impressions are the newly installed copy of GhostBSD boots to a graphical login screen where we can sign into our account we created during the install process. Signing into our account loads the Mate 1.18 desktop environment. They found Mate to be responsive and applications were quick to open. Early on, they noticed odd window when you just slide around, moving them with the mouse as if the windows were skidding on ice. Turning off the compositing in Mate corrected that. They also found the desktop's default font to be hard on the eyes, as it's very thin.
Yeah, fonts can be easily adjusted in the settings panel to your liking, and as long as you can find the panels and can read the labels, that should make you change those. Yep. There's a bunch of screenshots here, so you can get an impression how it looks like.
Shortly after signing in, they get the notification that software updates are available. Clicking the update icon brings up a small window showing us a list of packages to be updated. And updates for the base operating system, FreeBSD. FreeBSD has both separated the core operating system from the applications. This means you can update the core of the system separately from your applications. GhostBSD's core remains relatively static and minimal, while applications are updated on a semi-rolling schedule.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is cool, especially for a desktop, because then people can try out the new things and get updates quicker.
Mm-hmm. This is when we updated the core operating system. The update manager gave them the option of rebooting the system to finish the process. You can dismiss this prompt and continue working, but the wording of the prompt may be confusing. When asked if you want to reboot to continue the update process, the options are continue or restart, which both sound like it means restart, but I guess continue means wait until later. The continue option closes the update manager and returns you to the desktop. The update manager worked well for me, and the only issue I ran into is when I dismissed the update manager and then wanted to install the updates later. There are two launchers for the update manager, one in Mate system menu and one in the settings panel. Clicking either of these launchers didn't accomplish anything. Running the update manager from the command line simply caused the process to lock up until it was killed. I found I had dismissed the update manager once and had to wait until I logged in and out again, or out and in again. Alternatively, you could use a command line tool or the Octo package manager to install their updates.
Mm-hmm. And their conclusions. Most of my time, they write with GhostBSD, they were impressed and happy with the operating system. GhostBSD builds on a solid, stable FreeBSD core. We benefit from FreeBSD's performance and its large collection of open source software packages, and the Mate desktop was very responsive in his trials, and the system is relatively light on memory, even when run on ZFS, which has a reputation for taking up more memory than other file systems. So there's a bunch more in the conclusions, but this is the abbreviated version. If you want to check out the full article, we have that in our show notes.
This week's episode of BSD Now is also brought to you by iXsystems. Head over to iXsystems.com/BSDNow and check out their ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source. It's where I've bought all of my servers recently, and to that point, the storage shelves I told you guys about a couple of, only really weeks ago now, but a couple of months ago I bought some extra storage shelves to expand existing servers I had already bought from iX. That process was really nice because I gave them the serial number of the machine, and they pulled up all the stats and knew exactly, how much room there was to add expansion cards to the existing system and so on. In fact, they actually had pictures of the machine from when they were building it that I think they took for the podcast. But so I added these storage shelves and a bunch of drives to get more space. But the storage shelf wasn't completely full because I figured I'd buy hard drives over time instead of all at once because I didn't know how much more space I was going to need and how quickly. Turns out I need more space more sooner.
Yeah, you can never have enough.
Yes. So I told iX about that on Monday night. And so we got it all finished, sorted on Tuesday. And so the hard drives have shipped and they will arrive on Monday. And I will have 24 more 6 terabyte hard drives to spread between the primary and the backup machines for our production work. And we will have more space.
Yeah,
and
certainly.
The shelves will still have some free space left, which will allow me to consider going to 8 or larger terabyte drives as we get closer to filling up that shelf.
Yeah. And you got those by calling iXsystems and telling them exactly what you wanted?
Yes. It's like I have this existing server from you guys, and I need more space. It's already got 36 6 terabyte hard drives in it, but I need more space. And so they're like, well, we can do it this way or this way. We can go like single expander or dual expander expansion shelves, and you can set them up so you can daisy chain them and all this stuff. And we got it sorted out and ordered it, and they shipped them very quickly. There's a bit less to test with the storage shelf than there is with the whole system, but they still burn in the hard drives to make sure I didn't get any duds. And, you know, even with the new hard drives I bought, they come already in the hot swap caddies so that I don't have to sit there and put in 24 times 6 tiny little screws. Saves me a lot of time.
Oh yeah, I can imagine this being a lot of a big time saver actually. And if you don't have such a big environment as Alan has, you can start with the FreeNAS Mini or the FreeNAS Mini XL, which will give you already.
If you only need 4 hard drives. They sell a little system. It's like this big and fits under your desk. It's quiet, doesn't make any noise. It's great. Or maybe you're scared of all this Spectre and Meltdown stuff, and you've decided to get off the public cloud and have your own cloud, so you know that all the applications running on your cloud are yours, and there's no bad guys running on another VM on the same physical machine as you stealing your data. Well, they have the True Rack. It's a whole rack system, and it's got storage via TrueNAS, hyperconvergence. You get virtualization machines that works with VMware, Zen, KVM, whatever virtualization you want to do. You can do bhyve if you want. But it's got high availability storage, multiple compute nodes, and everything you need, high-speed interconnects, and it's an entire cloud in a box. And it scales to as many machines as you need. You can daisy chain a bunch of these whole racks together if you need. So you can build a whole data center or just a small office data center or whatever. But you can stop giving all your money to Amazon.
Yeah, that might be one solution. And if you're still undecided, then definitely check out iXsystems.com/BSD Now and download the free server buying guide with questions you should ask any vendor if you're building an open source software server. And you will find that the iXsystems can ask or answer those questions with the right answers and build you the system that you will be most happy with.
Yeah. You know, I wouldn't use them if it wasn't the best way to get it done.
Yeah, certainly. And you had good experiences with them, and why not continue that good customer relationship?
The amount of hassle they have saved me from is worth more than the considerable sum I've spent on the machines.
Yeah, certainly.
But yeah,
so check out iXsystems.
The best price, so why not?
Yeah, that's a good deal.
They have the right attitude, which counts for a lot too.
Oh yeah. All right. On to our next story, which is FreeBSD looks at making Wayland support available by default. So this is interesting over at Unix.
Mm-hmm. So this would be changing to the default compile options of a bunch of ports in FreeBSD ports so that Wayland support is built in. Not meaning that you will use Wayland by default, but meaning that the official
the options
packages
there.
will have all the Wayland stuff built in, and if you choose to use Wayland, the package will have both versions built. So that means sucking a bit more dependencies on the X stuff in the default package set, but it means you can use either without having to build custom packages, which seems like a reasonable trade-off to me.
Yeah, this is a slow migration path, so people can try it out, and if they still have issues or problems, they can still stay with the Xorg packages for some time, or the Xorg portion of the package, and then, slowly but steadily we're migrating to Wayland and the benefits it brings this way.
Yeah, this is FreeBSD developers acknowledge that Wayland is probably the future, and the cost of enabling Wayland support by default in a bunch of applications is just some slightly larger packages, and the amount added by Wayland is a lot less than the amount added by X, which is already on anyway, so it's probably worth it.
Mm-hmm. There's also a vote going on the FreeBSD mailing lists to flip the switch on this one. Oh, this is on TrueOS in this case?
No, second, there's TrueOS has already made the change, and
right,
both by
that's
default.
True. I thought of they didn't do they did that migration once they got the port, and are kind of testing it for the rest of the BSDs, I guess.
Yes, basically, since there was a question of how big of a difference does it actually make on an install base, TrueOS is like, well, we have an install base, so why don't we flip the switch and give it a try?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we should try to get
resident science experiment.
Yeah, well, we should try to get one of those developers on board and do an interview with them and see how it goes. I mean, how the adoption went and how many people provided feedback and things like that.
Yep. So our next story is a fun one. Drew DeVault writes, fork is not my favorite syscall.
Ooh, that should get people's attention in the Unix world.
Yes, this article has been on my to-write list for a while now. In my opinion, fork is one of the most questionable design choices of Unix. I don't understand the circumstances that led to its creation, and I grieve over the legacy rationale that keeps it alive to this day. So he says, let's set the scene. It's 1971, and you're a fly on the wall at Bell Labs, watching the first edition of Unix being designed on the PDP-11/20. This machine has a 16-bit address space with no more than 248 kilobytes of memory. They're discussing how they're going to support programs that spawn new programs, and someone has a brilliant idea. What if we copy the entire address space of the program into a new process running from the same spot, then let them overwrite themselves with the new program? This got a rousing laugh out of everyone present. Then they moved on to better designs, which would become immortalized in the more popular and influential operating system of all time. At least that's the story I'd like to have been told. In actual fact, the laughter becomes consensus. There's an obvious problem with this approach. Every time you want to execute a new program, the entire process space is copied and promptly discarded when the new process or new program begins. Usually when I complain about fork, the point when the supporters play the virtual memory card, pointing out that modern operating systems don't actually have to copy the whole address space. We'll get to that. But first edition Unix does copy the whole process space. So this excuse won't be held up at this time. By 4th edition Unix, the next one for which the kernel source has survived, they had wisened up a bit and started copying only segments when they faulted, when they were trying to be used. This model leads to a number of problems. One is that the new process inherits all of the parent process's descriptors, like open files and so on. So you have to close them all before you exec this other program. However, unless you're manually keeping tabs on all the open file descriptors, there's no way to know what file handles you must close. The hack that solved this is cloexec, the first of many hacks to deal with fork's poor design choices. this file descriptor problem balloons a bit. Consider, for example, if you want to set up a pipe, you have to establish a piped pair of file descriptors in the parent, then close every file descriptor except the pipe in the child. Then use dupe2, the pipe file descriptor, over the now recently closed file descriptor number 1. By this point, you probably had to do several non-trivial operations and utilize a handful of variables from the parent process space, which hopefully were on the stack so they don't end up being copied segments into the new process's address space. These problems, however, pale in comparison to my number 1 complaint with the fork model. Fork is the direct cause of the stupidest component I've ever heard of in an operating system, the out-of-memory killer.
Oh, here we go.
Say you have a process that is using half of the physical memory on your system and wants to spawn a tiny program. Since fork copies the entire process, you might be inclined to think that this will make fork fail. But on Linux and many other operating systems, since it does not fail, they agree that it's stupid to copy the entire process just to exec something else. But because fork is important for backwards compatibility, they just fake it and reuse the same memory map, except read-only, then trap the faults and actually copy only the bits that are needed. The hope is that the child will get on with it and exec before that actually happens. However, nothing prevents the child from doing something other than exec. It's free to use the memory space however it desires. This approach may lead to memory overcommitment. Linux has promised memory that it doesn't have, right? It's more than half the memory used by the first program, and then we made a copy of that. That's not a real copy, kind of like a clone in ZFS or whatever. But we're telling the second program, yeah, you have access to this more than half the memory, but there's not that much free memory. As a result, when it really does run out of physical memory, Linux will just kill a process until it has some memory to give to the program asking for memory. Linux makes an awful big fuss about never breaking user space for a kernel that will lie about memory it doesn't have, then kill programs that try to use it and have used the back alley memory that they were given. That this nearly 50-year-old crappy design choice has come to this astonishes them. Alas, I cannot rant forever about discussing the alternatives. There are better process models that have been developed since Unix. The first attempt I know of is BSD's vfork syscall, which is, in a nutshell, the same as fork, but with severe limitations on what you do in the child process, i.e. nothing other than calling exec straight away. There are loads of problems with vfork. It only handles the most basic use case. You cannot set up a pipe, you cannot set up a PTY, you can't even close open file descriptors you inherit from the parent. Also, you can't really be sure what variables you were and weren't editing or allowed to edit, considering the limitations of the C specification. Overall, this syscall ended up being pretty useless. Another model is POSIX_spawn, which is a hell of an interface. It's far too complicated for me to detail here, and in my opinion, far too complicated to ever consider using it in practice, even if it could be understood by mere mortals. It's a really bad implementation of a spawn paradigm. It basically operates like fork, but backwards, and inherits many of the same flaws. You still have to deal with children inheriting their file descriptors. For example, only now do it in the parent process rather than the child process. It's also straight up impossible to make a genuine pipe with POSIX spawn. Although he says, note, a reader corrected me, this is possible with the POSIX spawn file actions add dupe2, which is a hell of a function name. So let's talk about the good models, rfork and spawn, at least if spawn is done right. So rfork originated in Plan 9, like apparently all good ideas in Unix. And is beautiful little coconut of a syscall, much like the rest of Plan 9. They also implemented fork, but it's a special case of rfork. Plan 9 does not distinguish between processes and threads. All threads are processes, and all processes are threads. Therefore, new processes in Plan 9 are not the everything must go mess of your typical fork call. Instead, you specify exactly what the child should get from you. You can choose to include or not include your memory space, file descriptors, environment, and a number of other things specific to Plan 9. There's a cool flag that makes it so you don't have to reap the process too, which is nice because reaping children is another really stupid idea. It still has some problems, mainly around creating pipes without tedious file descriptor messing about, but it's basically as good as the fork model gets. Note, Linux offers this via the clone syscall now, but everyone just runs fork and exec anyway. The other model is the spawn model, which they prefer. This is the approach they took in the Night OS, which I guess is an operating system created by the author of the blog, and apparently also what's used in the NT kernel from Microsoft. I don't know much about NT, but I can tell you that it works. But I can tell you how it works in Night OS. Basically, you create a new process. It is kept in limbo until the parent consents to begin. You're given a handle for which you can configure the process. You can change its environment, load it up with file descriptors of your liking, and so on. When you're ready for it to begin, you give the go-ahead, and it's off to the races. The spawn model has none of the flaws of the fork model. Both fork and exec can be useful at times, but spawning is much better for about 90% of the use cases. If I were to write a new kernel today, I'd probably take a leaf from Plan 9's book and find a happy medium somewhere between rfork and spawn, so you can use spawn to start new threads in your process as well. To the brave OS designers of the future, ready to shrug off the weight of legacy, please reconsider fork.
Oh, okay.
I think there are like 8 variants of fork in FreeBSD that do different things. I know there's also been talk about a Capsicum version that would be something more like spawn. I think it was David Chisnell was talking about that. I have to catch up with him and see what he thinks about that.
Okay. Maybe we should do a fork working group at one of upcoming BSD Dev Summit.
The problem there is that you're not going to change what applications use, and that's where this is mostly coming from.
This would be kernel only and base operating system.
You can create the syscall. It's getting other people to use it. If it only exists on FreeBSD, like how many applications are going to have, if FreeBSD, launch a new program this way, and if everything else, launch it this way? Probably not. Right.
That's adoption issues.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly good solutions should emerge. And I mean, these need to be, this is 1971. This is already way back in the Unix history. And some of these concepts were original and probably not perfect. So people kept polishing and making them better over the years to keep a better or solve the problems they encountered. All right. Our next story is to enable ld.lld as Bootstrap linker by default on AMD 64. So some people would be like, what's the issue? So this is actually a move that's been planned for a long time because we're in the FreeBSD project.
Started in 2014?
Yep. I think they corrected themselves after that.
Well, the PR was created upstream at LLVM in 2015, but Ed first started thinking about doing this in 2014.
So you can already see how long this has been going on to move the FreeBSD userland into or the whole bootstrapping utilities into a non-GNU environment, so you don't have that dependency on GCC and other utilities.
So the LD in base up until this point has been the BFD version. I don't even remember what that means. But the linker is the part that takes the bits that your compiler makes and makes an executable out of it. And this is replacing the old, no longer maintained GPL version with LLVM's linker, which is called LLD, because they love LL everything. Not to be confused with LLDB, which is their debugger.
That sounds similar.
LLVM linker.
Yeah, so this is a commit from our friend Ed Mast, and you can read between the lines that he's super happy that this is now committed to the tree because a lot of people spend a bunch of time on it. So the commit message reads, so to enable LLD as Bootstrap linker by default on AMD64. So for some time, we have been planning to migrate to LLVM's LLD linker. Having a man page was the last blocking issue for using ld.lld to link the base system kernel and userland, which is addressed in a separate commit for the man page itself. Link the kernel and userland libraries and binaries with ld.lld by default for additional test coverage. This has been a long time in the making. On the 13th of April 2013, I think they corrected it to 2015. Yeah. He submitted an upstream tracking issue in LLVM PR 23214, which is kind of a meta issue using LLD as FreeBSD system linker. And since then, 85 individual issues were identified and submitted as dependencies. These have been addressed along with 2.5 years of other LLD development and improvements. He'd like to express his deep gratitude to upstream LLD developers Rui Uyama, Rafael Espindola, George Rimar, and Davide Italiano. They put in substantial effort in addressing the issues we found affecting FreeBSD and AMD64. And there are instructions how you can use the new linker or switch back to the old one in case you're experiencing any problems. But this is for people who want to test this out in FreeBSD current and head. And give this a lot of testing because that's an important component of the operating system, the linker. And the more bugs we find now, the better.
So there are two source.conf knobs. The one is using LLD as the bootstrap, meaning that's what you compile the compiler and the operating system with. So if currently that's the only one that's on by default. So FreeBSD and all the programs that are part of like make build world and make build kernel are compiled with LLD. But the actual LD command line tool that gets installed at the end of that is still the GNU LD. So that when you compile ports, it still uses the old one. If you want to be adventurous and switch to using the LLD for everything, you have to add this with LLD is LD. I think that's actually a typo in there. Yes. And that will make user bin LD be the LLD version. And that means you'll use it for compiling ports and stuff as well. Hoping for that to become the default sometime in the future. Currently that's waiting on getting Clang LLVM and LLD version 6 because that solves some problems with additional ports that wouldn't compile with the newer version of LLD. But slowly progressing. I know the FreeBSD cluster has been running the LLD binaries for a while, so it doesn't explode right away. But we'd like to know how it works for your use case, so do please check it out. And if it does have problems, just add without LLD bootstrap to your source.conf, and it'll switch back to the old thing, and everything will be back to normal.
Yeah, and a couple of commits after this one, they also activated it for i386. So if you're still on this architecture platform,
didn't know that was going to be a thing.
It's. I think the AMD64 has more priority because it's widespread use. But certainly all the other architectures need to follow up. But I mean, Alan and I have been to a lot of developer summits, and there was almost always a working group on toolchain. And this one has been a big piece towards having a completely new free toolchain in the FreeBSD operating system, so we can build the operating system without depending on any other external linkers, compilers, and compiler toolchains. So yeah, great work. Thank you, Ed, for your work on this one, and other people who have also provided patches and support. This is a big thing, even though it sounds small, but certainly it required a lot of work, and we're happy to have it now. Time for the Beastie Bits this week. We have a video interview with Peter Hessler, Reich Flöter, and Henning Brauer from BSDCan 2017.
Yes, it was very late coming out, but this was recorded in person at the conference by another podcast, and it's finally available, and so you should check it out. It's 3 of the biggest names in OpenBSD. Should be lots of fun.
Yeah. Our next little gem here is from FreeShell.de, talking about let me look, DSBMD. So what's that standing for?
It's a media file system type detection daemon for FreeBSD that allows local clients like DSBMC and DSBMC-CLI to mount storage devices. It is configured to work out of the box. It watches the mount table for changes, monitors DevD events for new storage devices, and polls your CD or DVD drives and card readers for media change events, determining the media type, volume name, and file system type. Mountable devices, changes in the mount table, as well as device add or removal events, and altered states of mounted devices.
Okay.
So it detects when you give it something that might be media that you might want to play.
Oh, yeah. There's more instructions how to install that, and sysctls you might want to change to VFS user mount equals 1, so that you can automatically, as non-root user, mount those.
Yep, as long as you own the target directory. But it has Fuse support for Linux's LVM, logical volumes, support for memory disks, MTP, the media transfer protocol, and PTP, the picture transfer protocol, I think. So it should also work nicely if you plug in, say, an Android device and be able to pull the pictures off or play music off it or whatever.
That's nice. Cool. Yeah, people should check that out. The next one we had covered.
It's nice to see multimedia stuff happening.
Yeah, for the desktop users, this is certainly a welcome change. Our next BSD bit is one we covered right before the year changed. So we had Chaos Communication Congress, 34th edition, and there was a talk we mentioned may contain dtraces of FreeBSD. And this is the recording there. I watched it live, at least parts of it. I accidentally missed the start of the talk, but it's been recorded, and the recording is out now at media.ccc.de, and people can rewatch that. It was a good talk about using dtrace on FreeBSD, what dtrace is, what it can do, and that was certainly a decent talk about the technology and what it can do, and also how it helps debugging and all the cool features that dtrace has, stack traces and inspecting the live system. Check out that talk, and Alan and I will meet the speaker in a couple of weeks, so we're looking already forward to that at FOSDEM.
Yep. Next up, we have a GitHub project called mirror-OpenBSD, which is a set of scripts to mirror and rsync OpenBSD mirror and also verify all the files as well.
Oh yeah, so that you know that you have the right files, they weren't truncated or altered within transit. Okay. That's
and so they break it up so that you can fetch certain directories more often than others. Releases only change every 6 months, whereas snapshots change like every week or whatever.
Very nice.
Looks like useful.
Oh yeah, certainly. People can run mirrors or sync that if they don't want to be connected the whole time. And our last item is also a little nugget for the old school people, because this is the ultimate old school PC font pack collection. And
just the look of the website itself reminds me so much of the old BBS days.
Oh, the good old days.
I want this website design.
They certainly put some effort into it, making it look like the old web pages or the old terminals. Yeah, so there's the font pack. It started out with an idea of paying tribute to ancient PCs and their bitmapped pre-GUI typography, if you can call it that way. It was inspired by similar efforts that cover other vintage machines, classic system fonts from the Amiga, C64, Apple II, Mac, ZX Spectrum, Ataris of this world. They're all celebrated, and you can find that in the font pack below. You can get a little preview how it would look like. And yeah, just reminisce some old times and maybe switch your console font to this one to make it more vintage.
Mm-hmm. Very nice.
So before we go into our feedback and questions section for this week, we should mention our sponsor for this part, which is Tarsnap. Go to tarsnap.com to download the client and all the necessary service, or sign up for the actual service if you're trying to create a backup which is properly secured and stored in the cloud. Because Tarsnap takes care of creating these secure backups locally on your machine before it's uploaded into the cloud. And then it's also deduplicated and compressed, so you don't need that much storage space. And then after that, the encrypted part will be put up into the cloud. Never will be an unencrypted part uploaded into the cloud.
Yeah, it's simple to use. It's pay-as-you-go, so no surprise bills. Simple billing. It's 20 cents per gigabyte for storage and 20 cents per gigabyte for backups. 25 cents, sorry. So it's easy to tell how much it's going to cost. I put in $20 originally and have not managed to spend it yet. That was 2 years ago now.
Yeah, because some things are not that big, and as backups grow, you can still recharge your account, of course, but you don't need to for the initial backups to sleep well at night, to make sure that you have everything secured and can pull it down because you're the only person holding the encryption key. This is certainly something you should check out.
It has a really smart segmentation algorithm. So it doesn't use a fixed block size where, say, changing a kilobyte of a file would affect 2 different 4K blocks or something. It has smarter segmentation than that. So it finds natural breakpoints and means that smaller chunks of changes actually have to be uploaded when there are differences. And because of deduplication, it means you store the whole file every time, but you only have to store the differences in the cloud. So you're only paying for the storage of each difference, not each whole file. But it means I have now over 100 weekly backups of my business documents. So I can go back to any one of those, and it's just fine. It's just there.
And
it's
command-line-wise,
so
it's
easy.
just tar. Yeah. And if you don't believe us, then read the testimonials on the website and be convinced this way.
$5 and try it. Problem solved.
Yeah. All right.
On to the questions.
The first one is from David about an approach and tools for snapshots and remote replication. He writes, "Thank you for providing such an informative show, something learned each week. Thanks for the feedback. I've been using FreeNAS for a couple of years, and I'm looking to accomplish some of the same tasks on stock FreeBSD. In particular, he's looking for a recommendation on a set of tools or approaches that will facilitate taking scheduled recursive snapshots locally and then sending them to a remote server. In particular, he's wondering whether the mechanisms that will allow for the snapshots on the remote side to be automatically managed. He's looking to end with identical datasets on both the remote and local machine that retain snapshots for a specified amount of time, like stale snapshots. Remote.
Yeah, the zrepl tool we looked at last week and previously, definitely a good place to start. If that doesn't fit for what you're looking for, look at ZXfer, ZXFER on GitHub. While I'm the de facto maintainer of that, I don't really maintain it anymore.
But it works.
Yes, but it does work. The way it does it basically is you can say if a snapshot exists on the remote side and not on the source side. So my snapshotting tool has removed the month-old daily snapshot. Mm-hmm. It will delete from the remote side any snapshots that no longer exist on the source side. Although it has a grandfathering option saying if a snapshot's actually older than, say, 3 months, then don't delete it. But it can be a little thingy. In particular, the advantage with zrepl is it takes care of taking the snapshots and replicating them, whereas ZXfer only does one, and you have to use something else like ZFS tools or something to take the snapshots.
Yep. So zREPL is going to be developed a little bit more, I guess. They have different ideas about pull and push models. So
and
they have
it has more optional transport systems and so on. It seems like a good project.
Yep. So we recommend this one, or try out ZXfer. It's also working fine. This is also covered in Alan's book. Cool. Thanks for the question. And next one is Brian with help getting his FreeBSD systems talking across the city. He writes, "Hello, Alan and Benedict. Thanks again, guys, for a great show." And he has a problem he's hoping we can help him with. So he's trying to set up a server at a family member's house to use as a backup. He has both systems configured here to use ZFS, send over SSH to replicate the pool. The issue is that he once moves the backup server to the other house, does he get them to connect? He's unable to open ports, apparently, in the firewall at either location for this, so it is possible to use a third public server to broker the connection. Yeah,
that will make it slower, and will use twice the traffic on the broker. So while, yes, you could do that, probably not the most sensical.
Depends on the amount of data you have to push.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he considered setting up a VPN server on DigitalOcean Droplet and having both of these connected, and then, traffic would flow.
Yeah,
but how would
DigitalOcean gives you enough traffic quota that might work, although that will only possibly make it slower. There's not really a way to indirect a connection like you're talking. That's not how that works.
Yeah. Maybe move
Ideally, you
individual
would be able
disks.
to open the port on even just one of the two sides, and then the one could connect to the other on a cron job or whatever.
Yeah. Because you want to do these things periodically and not just once.
Yeah. Yeah, the only other option is something like stun or something, but I don't know how you would apply that in this case.
Maybe someone else can help, and we'll cover it in a future episode.
Yep.
All right. We'll see. If anyone has a solution, then send it to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and we'll connect the people. Yep. Next up is Malcolm with the first BSD meetup in Stockholm happened, and it was great. Oh yeah, I remember this one. We announced it a couple of times, and this is apparently how it was. It's small, it's short and sweet. The first BSD meetup happened in Stockholm this week, and it was great. It was small and intimate, so you could talk to many people. It started with Niklas Seising giving an introduction talk. Then Janne Johansson gave a talk about entropy and OpenBSD, and after which pizza came and people mingled. I got to meet a few OpenBSD developers, and he's looking forward to the next one.
Yes, so Niklas and Janne and other people, when you organize the next one, make sure you tell us enough ahead of time that we can tell people. Especially since we're going to be recording a week ahead of time until the end of February. That means we need like 2 weeks notice in order for people to have enough heads up to know about your meeting.
Get there, yeah. But it seems like...
I hope this inspires more people to start more user groups.
Yeah. Don't be put off if not many people are showing up on the first time. So it just needs a little bit time to establish itself. And sometimes people can't make the first meeting, but they want to go to the second one. So don't give it everything up if only a couple of people show up on the first time. So be there, establish a presence, and then people will go there even if they can't make every meeting. It's certainly becoming a regular thing if they and once they see that there's value in talking to other people that are using BSDs, it certainly is a good way of connecting to people. Cool, thanks for that feedback. And the last one is Brad with an update on iXsystems. He writes, "Hello, Alan, Benedict, and JT. He wanted to update us on a question he asked in episode 220 about the iXsystems system he was having.
Right, so he was trying to install something, and it was trying to pull in GCC ECJ every time.
Yeah, I remember. Oh, yeah. Now I know who asked that. Yeah. Oh, cool. So this resolved this way, so he no longer had to remove the package. This was resolved the issue where all of the KDE packages were getting uninstalled, but only on his laptop. This was because the KDE package that was getting uninstalled was the KDE meta package, which left all of the actual KDE packages orphaned, and the updater dutifully removed them. So as we said, going forward, this shouldn't be an issue, and it wasn't. He also has a second question about the best approach to upgrade the drives in his FreeNAS. So right now he has 4 3 terabyte drives in the RAID Z2. Since he has a backup of the pool, he was considering getting a 2 or 4 more 3 terabyte drives, nuking the pool, and adding the new existing drives to the existing ones. The other option would be to replace the drives with 4 or 6 terabyte drives. And he wants to extend the pool to at least 4 data drives, since 4 drive RAID Z2 just seems silly. And what are our thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, if you have enough SATA ports, you could try to go with just 2 sets of 4 3 terabyte drives and not having to rebuild the pool. For expanding it to adding 2 or 4 more 3 terabyte drives, that's a feature that's coming. Will you be able to grow a RAID Z2 without rebuilding it? But it probably be another year before that's available. So you probably don't want to wait. So yes, if you have a backup of everything and recreate it, that's good. If you have enough SATA ports to have the new pool and the old pool both exist at the same time and do ZFS replication, that's even better than restoring from a backup and probably faster. Or yes, one option is to swap out old drives for newer, bigger drives, like 4 or 6 terabytes. And then you have the old drives left over and can create a new pool or add them back as a new VDEV. It depends how many slots you have in your system to hold hard drives. But yes, 6 data drives gives a much better parity ratio than 4 with a RAID Z2. But the advantage of doing 4 with a RAID Z2 versus, say, doing RAID 10 is any 2 drives can fail, whereas with a RAID 10, only 1 from each mirror can fail.
Yeah,
the advantage of the RAID 10 is more IOPS, though. So
it's a trade-off always between space performance and resiliency.
I would definitely say you don't want to go with RAID Z1. You know, hard drives fail a lot and generally at the worst possible time.
I had one failing
at the same time.
Yeah, but it also depends on how quickly you fill up your drives, your pool. I mean, with that, you can already go far. But yeah, you have options, definitely. It's not a dead end.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thanks for the question. And again, we need your feedback and questions. Send them to feedback@bsdnow.tv, either with questions or blog posts you found about BSD or any stories you want us to mention, so that we have future shows filled with stuff.
We just got a thank you from somebody whose blog post we mentioned the other day. They've only been watching for like 10 episodes, and they've already got a post on here. So if you've been watching for longer, how come you haven't had a post on here yet? Because you haven't sent it in to us.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be big. It's just, could be small, could be...
Michael Shirk did a nice one on just, hey, I had to set up a CentOS VM in bhyve. I want to remember how to do it next time. So I wrote it down on my own blog, so I could refer to it later. It's just my personal notes. But hey, it helps other people here.
Yeah, this is exactly what this is. I mean, people are looking for how-tos and how to do things in the BSDs, and other people write this thing, and you never know how big your blog post is going to become after we covered it on the show. All right, then thanks for watching, and see you next week.